Hello, and welcome to the We Are All Human podcast. We are continuing our season on life purpose, and I'm so excited to have with us today someone that I met online. Her name is Samantha Mackay. How I met Samantha is she actually interviewed a friend of mine when you worked for Truity. So, Samantha, we're so excited to have you. Please introduce yourself and give us whatever bio you would like to give.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And I am an Enneagram coach. I particularly focus on helping people with chronic illness because that's been a lot of what my life journey has been about. I currently live in Australia, spend a lot of time with my young niece and nephew. Adapting to living with young children is quite an adaptation, but a lot of fun along the way.
It is different for sure. Tell us a little bit about Australia. Like for one, what is it like there?
Right now it's hot. So I grew up here. I have uh, lived here basically until 25 or so, no, 23. And it's I think of it as having more of this extroverted culture, particularly in Sydney, where I'm from, where it's all about um, the beach and being outside and all the sunshine. I think in a way that makes it more extroverted, unlike a cold country. And I've lived in some cold countries and they've got a more of an introverted feel to them, which I always found really fascinating. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say about Australia. It's got lots of scary things, lots of things that will eat you, and well, a few quirks, definitely a few quirks to the place.
It just blows my mind because I'm from, the States. I'm from South Carolina and, really haven't traveled too much and definitely haven't been to Australia. And I don't know anybody personally who has been to Australia or knows anybody from Australia. So very interesting because it's pretty cold here. We haven't entered spring yet. So it's low 50s. It's not too cold, but it's not warm enough for shorts or anything like that. But super
No, we're
interesting.
definitely in I don't know what it converts to, maybe around 100. We're getting regular 40-degree days at the moment, especially on the farm. And so that gets quite intense.
So do you live on a farm right now?
Not at this present moment. I'm actually in Sydney, but my niece and nephew are on a farm. And so that's where I am most of the time.
Gotcha. That's pretty wild and free, right? Do you like being on the farm?
Uh, my sister and I were often described as chalk and cheese. So I'm sort of the city art gallery, theatre person, and she's the horses and the farm and the animal sort of person. And so we're so different. And really, the farm is sort of her place. And it's quite an adjustment for me being there. I don't think my personality could have handled it several years ago. It's very isolated. I can't pop anywhere. There's definitely no just go walk down the street for something because it's a solid half hour from anywhere, and I don't really drive. So for me, it's quite isolating. It is peaceful, and there isn't as much distractions or things, and so there's always bonuses to the isolation. But as a seven, it's about, are you ready to handle those? You know?
Gotcha. Yeah, that is really interesting. I guess it would be different. I mean, it sounds awesome to me because I love isolation and that sort of thing. But I know that especially, if you were in a place, you're not the same personality type as me, but then you also have been accustomed to living in a city and having, just the convenience. There's a lot of conveniences in the city. I used to live even further out and we couldn't get any type of delivery type service, anything. You had to drive at least 30 minutes to get anywhere that you needed. And so if you didn't drive, it would be very isolating, but very interesting, to me about Australia.
Yeah, so I grew up in Australia, and then I spent a year and a half living in Canada and the US. And then I was back in Australia for a few years. And then I sort of been away for 15 years, which was a mix of sort of living in London, sort of England, and then in New Zealand for a lot of the time. And so I've just returned to Australia 2 years ago. And so it sort of feels like this sort of strange homecoming. It's this experience that a lot of expats sort of have, of where you never really have a home again because you always belong somewhere else. Like you never quite belong anywhere anymore. And it's this, so it's a bit of a strange sensation. But what I'm appreciating from having been away is being able to come back to, my homeland, and a place where when I was younger, you sort of really bought into a lot of the propaganda and the belief systems. And when you've got some distance, you can look back and go, well, actually, do I agree with that? Is that what do my values or principles align with what is the predominant culture of this country? And I've really appreciated being able to separate those things out, this side of the journey.
Oh yeah. Step back and have some perspective and just like hear what it's like other places to be able to figure out. Yeah. I mean, I think that that happens for everybody in like different ways, like their religion, whatever they grew up being immersed in, they have to decide as an adult if that's something that they actually buy into or if that's just, they're just doing whatever they saw a pattern for them. So COVID was the biggest thing that, I think has happened. And it definitely allowed an opportunity to think about things in a different way and really evaluate, where we are as people. And I think our culture will change because of that to some degree. It has to.
Mm.
So I think it makes a big difference. So since we're talking about life purpose, what are some things that you really enjoyed doing as a child? What were your passions then?
Mm. I loved creating. So I loved painting and writing and like playing in these creative ways, climbing trees and taking photos and dancing. A lot of it just was really creativity focused. And I don't want to say performance focused because it wasn't necessarily about singing and dancing or performing for others. It was just something I just enjoyed about being able to create things in some way. And yeah, I spent a lot of time doing that in the outdoors, basically, when my passion's going hiking, um, climbing trees, getting out and about.
I loved all those things. And I'm not a very good, artist or anything, but my daughter's a pretty good artist and she will just sit in there and draw. But then sometimes you have to let her show you the drawings because she doesn't want you to see because it's for her. It's a way that she sort of calms herself down or entertains herself. So that sounds like kind of like what you did maybe as a child, just kind of entertaining yourself, doing whatever the flow was, whatever you enjoyed doing, and just going from thing to thing and keeping interested. I guess your imagination was, I mean, it sounds so awesome just to think about it, as a child, just having all that time to let your imagination run wild with you sounds pretty, it sounds like a luxury now being an adult.
Yeah, following your ideas and just being able to make things. And I always really enjoyed just creating, like making things in some way.
What was your educational journey? So as you started getting older, like what were you trying to, how were you trying to funnel that into a career or,
And that's where things really started to stall in some way because I really got the message very strongly that creativity, writing, or anything like that couldn't be plan A. It could only ever be plan B. And I still had this strong urge to sort of change the world in some way, help the world be more creative in some form. But I just didn't know what that was. But in my late, teens, it became pretty clear to me that change seemed to happen through business. That was this belief that I sort of took on. It didn't happen through the government. It didn't necessarily happen through activism per se, but I started to believe that change happened through business. And so I went to university and studied like commerce and accounting and law, thinking, well, if you understand how those two things work, then you understand how the world works. And actually, I mean, that is in some way, but as I say that out loud, I'm trying to understand how the world works. What I'm looking for, is a framework to understand this thing called life. And I got that a lot later on. I didn't get that from business and law, but that's what I was trying to achieve. And it came out of that. And it wasn't necessarily, I didn't necessarily love studying those things. I think I'd want to, if I'd go back now, I'd do it entirely differently. But came out the other side, ended up with a job in law because everything else I applied for just didn't work out. It sort of felt like that law became the only place I could go rather than the place I really wanted to go. So law became the last choice rather than the first choice. It wasn't something I was going, yes, I really want to be a lawyer. I had the skills for it. And I was great at going to court and debating. And, I had the skills for law, but it was never my first choice. And so when I started working in law, it's not surprising that I got really depressed while doing it. I really did feel trapped in some way. And there was very little I liked about it. Actually, that's not quite true. There are some things I liked about it because I found opportunities and ways to do things I enjoyed more with it. But on the whole, I didn't love law. And a lot of, as we're getting towards the end of my time in law, the thing I just kept asking myself was, I want to do something more creative. When I look at this career path for a lawyer, when you go from sort of paralegal to solicitor to associate to barrister or to partner, whichever path you take, the path is the same. There was nothing unique or creative or exciting or different about it. The lens through which I looked at law was you just do the same thing again and again for the rest of your life. Yes, you might get better at it. Yes, you might get paid more money, but there was nothing exciting about that to me. My 7 ego was like, this sounds horrendous. Why would we want to do that? And so, yeah, eventually I left. I did obviously leave law, but it was difficult because this drive for creativity was so strong, but they just had no way to really get expressed through the choices I sort of had to make.
But the drive for creativity was more than you were getting because of the progressive tiers the pathway that everyone had to pretty much take. There wasn't a creative way to get to a solution or to
Yeah,
get, to get to the main point. Yeah. You wanted to design your own path, maybe.
I wanted to be able to look into the future and there be something exciting in it. And this path, as I stood and looked ahead in this legal path, I just couldn't see what that might be.
So that's fascinating that you're a lawyer. I had no idea. That is really cool. So what else did you do? What'd you do next? So you started feeling, maybe burnout or unhappy. What did you do after that? You started exploring some passions, or how did you get out of that?
So I had this idea that I wanted to leave law years before I did, as often many of us do when we think about career
Yeah.
changes. And I was working for, comparatively a great law firm in Sydney. When I decided I wanted to go to London, it's quite a common path for Australians to go and do a few years in London. And I don't know, it was just at that moment, it just seemed like the thing to do. So I was like, I'll go to London, I'll get a job in a law firm because that's, that should be reasonably straightforward. And then we'll figure the rest out. And I arrived in London basically as the global financial crisis was starting in 2008. And, London went from being this vibrant, anything happens place to sort of having this very depressed feeling as almost, really partly at the center or very directly impacted by the GFC. And it was a really strange sort of experience at that time, but it really affected my legal experience. I sort of, I had a job where I sort of had almost nothing to do for a while, and then, the culture didn't work. It was really not a great fit. And then the whole organization went through a redundancy process, a layoff process,
Right.
which for law firms is basically unheard of. It just happens in law firms. Yeah, and it was such an interesting experience. My team wasn't affected at all, so I kind of could watch from the sidelines. And what I really saw was this disingenuousness between what they wanted us to tell clients and how they were treating us and the messaging internally. And I saw this really strong disconnect with how they were treating people. Tell clients it's fine, but inside, or like It just
Right.
didn't match up.
Right.
And it's what later really became to known as that employee branding and the employee value proposition. But because I saw that so strongly, that was sort of in my mind as sort of something I wanted to address or solve. So I sat down and made a list of all the different careers I might want to do. That list had 17 items on it. It had anything from film producer, it had coach on it. Like this, it was this crazy long list of things, all the possibilities that I could, imagine. And then a friend of mine helped me whittle them down to 3, and we sort of got there. And we realized London wasn't a great place for changing careers for something that was drastically different from law. And I sort of didn't entirely know what to do about that. But then life took me to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, I sort of arrived and there was really no way I could do law. And I sort of said no to doing law at all. So I sort of just plan A, just tossed it out. And I was sitting in the office with a recruiter. And really, so much goes down to the people who are willing to help you on your journey. And she was willing to see something unusual and try and figure out what to do with it. And she said to me, well, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? And I spent solid half an hour talking about organizational culture and organizational development and leadership, because these are sort of things I'd already been doing. I've been a trainer and running workshops and sort of doing education just for fun for already 10 years by this sort of point. And so that's sort of where my next sort of career change went into. She got me a job as a PA in the organizational development team of the biggest company in New Zealand. And I just worked my way from there. And, if she hadn't trusted me, and we hadn't found a way to take that leap together, I wouldn't have thought to apply for a PA role and just to get started. And so that was great.
Yes.
And yeah.
That's
And
wonderful. I mean, to have that, and it's smart of you to actually go to a recruiter. I don't know if that's normal path, but that's not what I would necessarily think to do. So that's awesome that you advocated for yourself and try to find the best situation too. I mean, that's what they do, but you had to take the initiative first to be able to find that. So
and
good
someone
idea.
who didn't just treat you as a number, because a lot
Hmm.
of recruiters do. So it's good to find someone who's willing to see the human side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that led me through a series of steps into organizational development and leadership development and coaching. And so I became a coach in 2013. And that was one of those, how there's those strange serendipitous moments in life where things align. Because I'm normally someone who would overthink spending $8,000 on something.
Yeah.
I would research all the options, I would analyze it, and I might even never get around to making that decision. But there was
Yeah.
something in this moment where I just happened to have the money because of this IT training contract I'd done. And my old boss, who was amazing, was a big fan of David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Group. And there was this coach training program that just happened to be started. And I just didn't even give it a second thought. I just signed up for it. At that point, I hadn't really thought about being a coach. It just was this strange serendipitous moment. And I found myself in this coach training program, which was amazing and obviously shaped where I am today. But I rocked up into that. And on the first day, because, one of the things they're teaching you is emotional labeling and helping your clients identify what they're feeling. And I took the teacher aside and said, listen, we're talking a lot about emotions. Do you have a list? Because I don't think I have any words, vocabulary for emotions. Like, we got anything? And
Yeah.
she looked at me like I had 2 heads. She was like, no one has ever asked us this before. And so I turned to Google later that day to find some.
Yeah.
But that was the first time I really had a clue that I might have something known as alexithymia, people who don't have a real understanding of emotions, or just the sense that the way in which I'd been raised and grown up meant I didn't have any words. There was no emotional communication. There was no sense of having a relationship with my emotions in the way I might have words to describe them and have a sense of what they were. And it was just this huge aha moment to realize there was this big part of my life and my humanness that I had no understanding of.
Yeah, I definitely know what that's like. I mean, there's no diagnosis here, but it takes me a really long time to understand what's going on inside, for sure. If there's emotions, I just, they feel erratic. They feel like I cannot depend on them for accurate data. You change, so I'm not going to listen to you because I'm not going to listen to data points that change. That doesn't make sense. So, yeah, I understand completely what you're talking about.
So after the PA role, which was 8 weeks, I moved into the organizational development team, running
Okay.
workshops. And then
Okay.
I stepped into a big role running one of their culture change programs. And that
Wow.
lasted for about a year. So, see, sevens, we can talk ourselves into pretty much anything. It's great. Um,
Yeah.
and so then, and then that sort of ended that period, and I sort of moved into contracting. And contracting was great because you get to try a range of you get to sample a whole lot of stuff to see what fits and what suits. So I did some IT training, I did some leadership development work for hospitals and in aviation, and like a range of different things. And what was interesting for me was I was always asking myself this question. This was after the coach training, but was always asking myself this question: how can I bring more creativity into my life? And each contract I'd experiment. I'd be like, okay, if I only work 4 days, can I have this creativity? Or if I like, does it have, how can I bring creativity in? Where do I have space for it? And it took me a long time to see that creativity wasn't just something I could do on the weekends or my days off. It had to be woven into every aspect of my work in some way. But it took several years to really, of experimenting, to really figure that out, because I'm not a designer. I'm not an artist. I'm not someone who you think of being in the creative industries in terms of marketing or advertising or any kind of, graphical sort of thing. I think sometimes when your creativity doesn't lie in that direction, it's hard to figure out exactly what does creativity look like through the lens of the business world. And it was a hard question to answer.
Yeah, because I think people usually think of those as two different sides of the brain, right? I mean, you have your what, left brain, which is that is your sort of structured, detailed, logical side, and then you have sort of the emotional side, where the creativity and all of that sort of flows. And it does seem like you're combining both sides, which is, I mean, we need that. We need both of those things combined. And it sounds like you were looking sort of for a formula, like a perfect, I don't know, maybe a blueprint of the perfect amount of days that you could work, and then still interweave your creativity, and how you could make sure, like, and what is really, I probably say this on each of the podcast episodes. It's like people really seem to identify whatever their purpose is with what they're doing as a job, however they're paying their bills. And that is, and some people do interweave their job with their identity and, your identity purpose. I guess that could be a synonymous, but sometimes it's hard to like figure out, like, am I this? Like, it's just some people who like to live a really minimal lifestyle. It's like, I can only identify with like a couple of things. Like, I can't do all these things. I can't be all these people. So I need to make sure that I craft my life and leave space for all these things that I must have in my life, and creativity and the way that, your passion projects, you got to make sure that you have time for that stuff if that's what drives you. But
Hmm.
that seems like that's what you did. And you took from maybe each contract, what you liked about each thing, creative wise, and tried to make that into what you want to ultimately offer. Is that kind of what happened? So you worked the contract jobs until when?
I think right up until the start of COVID, really, because that's when I started working with Truity more as on a permanent part-time basis, which was great. And
Yeah, you
at Truity,
definitely did so much with them. I mean, you
yeah.
contributed so many good things. I loved your stuff.
And it was a place where I could bring my interests, which was personality and personal development, and to some extent organizational development, but not as much, with the creativity of writing and making videos and interviewing people. And it really was a way that they could all come together, because I'd become interested in personality a few years earlier, and I'd started bringing it into my leadership development programs. And I could see how useful it was when used in the right way. And I really loved being able to pull all those things into one place.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, same here. I really love the Enneagram is just so multidisciplinary, and that's just one tool. There's others, Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder, High Five, whatever. It's just so interesting how it can be applied to literally all aspects of your life. Workplace, relationships, jobs. But, like I've said before on here, life is about communication, period. And if you find how to communicate with people in the way that they need to hear it, then you've really done something. Doesn't matter really what you're talking about, but as long as you're able to convey to them where they can actually hear what you're saying.
Mm.
But I watched many videos that you created for Truity, and I thought you did a phenomenal job with them. And
Oh, thank
that's
you.
the first time I'd heard of Truity is actually from you and that interview with Krista. So what happened after that? So that was like during COVID times. So after
Mm.
everything started opening back up, did that sort of change things for you?
Yeah, so Trudy and I wrapped things up only 6 months or so ago.
Okay.
And but with COVID changing, opening up was when I sort of left New Zealand. My sister sort of needed me in Australia, but also it just became this time where I think there was this time in 2000, like 2022, where it was almost like everyone's lives were upending in some way. And
Yeah.
moving countries, moving houses, changing jobs, it was just everyone seemed to be in upheaval in some form. And for me, it was first moving to Australia and giving up my flat in Auckland, in New Zealand, putting all my stuff into storage, going to Australia for what I thought would be 6 months. So far, it's now been 2 years, and all
Well,
my stuff is still in storage. Um, and and then sort of a year, 18 months later, then wrapping things up with Truity. And so I think this whole 2 year period has been a lot of transition and reframing and reshaping, and really asking myself the question, what is it that I really want to be doing, and what is it that I'm good at? And because that changes over the course of your life, what you're good at changes, and it evolves, it becomes more nuanced, and things change. And so, yeah, I don't think I've really fully settled into the next phase. I think I'm still in this transition, this post-COVID transition. Um, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're on a path of still, moving in a positive direction, in like a more focused, like you said, nuanced direction, just forward movement. So tell me about the company that you started, the Individuo process. When did that come about?
It's existed for several years, but it's, I struggle with sort of putting myself out there. And so if we come back to personality type and the Enneagram sort of sequencing, I'm social repressed. And
Okay.
so a lot of the work of the last sort of 6 to 12 months has been working through the fear of putting myself out there and that marketing piece. So the individual, has existed for 3-ish years in many different forms, but really it's only sort of been truly birthed in the last sort of 3 to 6 months. And it is really the place where for me to share my sort of Enneagram coaching with the world. But really, it's a place for people with sort of chronic illness and chronic disease to find some relief from their pain by healing and tending to and releasing some of the emotional, mental, and spiritual wounds that contribute to the physical illness or disease. And so it's sort of a place for that, really. But I didn't know that's what it was going to be when I first started it.
So you talk about somatic work. You have a substack that I don't know if you just started it, but I just started seeing it. It's called the, hold on, let me think, Notes to Myself or Notes to Self, right?
Yeah.
Your Substack. And I love your writing. And it's, I love it because it's like, it's saying, I don't know. I won't say it's unpredictable. I don't want to say that because that sounds like kind of a negative slant, but it's interesting because you don't know what you're going to say next. And that's what I really appreciate because I like, I want to see something interesting. And you have so many different types of things that you offer. And this may be part of what you do at the individual process. You talk about somatic work. And I think you just mentioned that before it cut out. But what do you mean by somatic work? Can you explain a little
Mm.
bit about what that really is?
Yeah. Just thinking about how to start answering that question. So somatic means body. Soma means the body. And when you start looking at things through the lens of the Enneagram, you realize that the body and the body center is really ignored and overlooked in the culture we live in. We live in a very head-centered culture and a head-centered sort of society. And that focus on the head has sort of been in place for, say, sort of several centuries with the scientific, revolution, evolution as that sort of come about. Emotional intelligence and valuing what the heart has to offer has really only been on the rise for 50 years,
Yeah.
maybe not even that long. And then the soma and the body and its intelligence and it as a place for healing has really, I'd say, only sort of 10, 20 years. And even then, I don't think it's widely understood or accepted.
I want to hear what somatic work is because I know I'm not doing that. I can promise you I'm not doing somatic work. I just joined a gym
Oh.
after 10 years, so I'm trying to get in my body.
Well, so let's use you as an example for what somatic work could look like, because you're
Okay.
five.
Yeah.
You like me for a while. You sort of forget that you had a body. It was
Yeah.
this annoying meat sack that just carried around the most important thing that existed,
Yeah.
and it really was inconvenient a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And when I first saw a therapist, our first job was trying to reconnect the head and the body because they were so disconnected. And I think one thing we've forgotten as a society is the head and the body aren't separate things. They are one. Our brain is as much in our heart, in our gut, and in the rest of our being as it is in our head. And the heart and the gut are actual legitimate brains. They have enough neurons and all the jazz to be decision making brains. And so we've got to stop thinking of our head as being this sort of special, wondrous sphere that exists and floats around, on this walking device. And so when we start to think about reconnecting all the centers in the body as a whole, it's how do we start to do our inner work through the body? So, for example, you could go to a boxing class, reach out to eight. You're at point eight. What are activities that eights do normally in the body that would help you get into the body? So, boxing. Not some of the martial arts are a bit too five-ish, but just something that's a bit more instinctive, in motion. You don't stop and think about it too much. It's just that, the physicality to it. Sevens do really well with walking because it really helps get the energy out of our heads and down into our feet where it just never is. We float around so much.
Mm-hmm.
Sixes are a bit different. They just do well with things where they, again, just don't think. So, table tennis and ping pong, there is that anticipation that sixes do well with, but there isn't necessarily a lot of time to think through too much of it.
This is
And
very interesting.
they also work well with reaching out to, where are they? Nine, up into nine activities. So doing sports that are more collective, like soccer. Sevens, they can reach over to one and do activities like rowing that's a little more structured. And so it's really just looking at things that connect into the body center and think, okay, how can I do a bit more of that?
Love that. That is really, I just talked to my husband about boxing earlier in the week. I said, I think that would be something I would really like just to get frustrations out.
Mm.
Because I do have a lot of like eight anger that I don't feel like I can get out of my body. And, like I said, I just started going to the gym. That's probably, embarrassing to say, but I'm going. At least I'm going there. But I did have like a lot of anger recently, and I was like, I feel like I'm going to explode. What can I do? How can I either drive fast, listen to like really loud music? I was like raging. I was so mad. I haven't been that mad in a long time. And I was like, how do I get this out of my body? And I was like, I think I'm just going to have to go run at the gym.
Hmm.
You know, I
But
have to
there are
get
some
this
other
out. And
ways. So, like tantrum like a toddler, stomp on the floor, like jump up and down, sit in the car, scream out loud, scream into a pillow, punch a
yeah,
pillow. It Because waiting till we get to the gym means we're already forcing our bodies to hold on to it. And so it's in the immediate moment, how can we start to use our bodies to release it? And this is a lot of work I do with my clients, because in chronic illness, it's a part of the chronic illness is something we're too afraid or unable to say in some way. There's something deeply held within us that we're desperate to say. And because we're unable to, for many different reasons, it's sort of eating us up alive in some way. And one of the first things we have to do is start releasing anger, and or sadness and or fear. But often anger is the place to start. Usually that's sort of more at the surface and easily accessible. And it's just different ways of releasing anger.
I know that you have a chronic illness journey. I don't know if you want to talk about that now and how that sort of ties in and how you can relate. Do you feel that that's something that you've dealt with? Like once you started to learn how healthy ways to release your emotions, that sort of, helped in your healing journey at all?
Going to therapy made such a huge difference. But I actually wasn't able to access a lot of those feelings until I'd done some somatic work with different types of healers that reduced some of the stress and pressure on my body to make it safer. Um,
Okay.
in a contact care session, which basically looks at how do you release the shock of something happening. So if you had an accident, there would be a shock of some kind, and in that position, your body would keep trying to hold you in the position that the shock took place, like you're frozen in that moment. And so the
Okay.
pain you get, the ongoing prolonged pain, isn't from the injury itself, it's from your body trying to hold you in the position of the shock. And so when you're able to release that, and it's not painful or anything, it's just knowing how to do it within the body. That pain can go away. A certain amount of ease returns to the body. And this was the first time I really realized I'd had a head injury that needed attending to. And I'd been seeing the one practitioner for sort of maybe 18 months at this point. And I was like, right, I feel like I've run out of physical, traumas and shocks to deal with. What about emotional ones? And we did my parents' divorce, the moment I first got informed about it. And he's like, okay, so sit in the position you're in, go into the position you're in when your body first had the shock. I was like, right, well, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor and I was facing this direction. And then he looks for where the body's not moving. And by releasing that shock, it made it possible that I was able to go into therapy and talk about it. Because when I first started seeing my therapist, talking about my parents and my family, my past, was like looking at a door that was on fire. And thankfully the therapist was like, well, you don't need to go near it. It's good to see what that looks like, but we don't have to go there. But once we released the shock from the soma and from the body, there was space and capacity. It's my dog in the background.
Oh, I knew that was a dog.
Capacity to then talk about the feelings. And so that's one of the reasons why I spend a lot of time talking about growth and healing. And I define growth as increasing our capacity to stay with discomfort, and healing is being able to tend to what's underneath. The way we do the growth piece, increasing our capacity, doesn't always come from learning how to stay, with the discomfort longer. It can come from doing somatic work where we create more safety and we heal what's underneath. And so the body can just handle more pressure.
It's absolutely fascinating. That is like the first time I've heard any of that. Um, yeah, that is, I don't know what to say. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. So in your business, do you handle the somatics too? Do you do that type of work for your clients or with your clients? You guide them through that?
To some of it, yes. One of the things I found that in the sessions, yes, I use the Enneagram to create some insight. But a lot of it is going into the body and see what the body has to say, and going into the feelings and seeing what feeling needs to be released, um, and making it safe to do something weird, basically. So I'm
Yeah.
working with a self-preservation too at the moment. There's a lot of anger that needs to be released, but for two, anger is incredibly uncomfortable,
Yeah.
incredibly difficult to access. And so a lot of what we're doing in the session, or what I'm doing, is validating the feeling and creating a space in which that anger, where she can get angry to me, and then providing different ways she could practice getting angry at home between the sessions.
Yeah, because I would imagine as a self-preservation, like their focus of attention is mainly on their body and their comfort. And so anything that feels like the anger rising up in their body, I'm sure feels like danger zone, stop, must stop,
And
and
especially
so
for a two that's about the relationship.
yeah. Oh yeah. That is so, yeah, that is really interesting.
And I have another client, well, previous client who I worked with, who turned out to be a sexual nine. And she wanted to be more creative. She was a lifelong creative like me, but struggled for it to come out. And what we discovered was that every time she went to do something creative, she'd experience these physical pains in her body. And she'd been trying to get someone to figure out these phantom pains for you. She'd been to various doctors, various therapists and practitioners, but they would just, whenever she went to be creative for herself, these pains show up, and that, as a nine, you're gonna be like, oh, this pain's not good. Let's find a way to, numb it out. But really, these phantom pains were unexplained, but they showed up whenever she wanted to be creative. And so we worked through, firstly, different activities to help release and get in touch with anger. But we also went through and looked, when was a time when that part of her identity felt unsafe and felt like it was taken away from her in some way. And so when we combined the finding this moment when that sort of almost wounding sort of occurred, combining it with physical activities, anger expressing activities. So a lot of screaming. She did a lot of screaming work between sessions. And then in session, we would just spend time inside her body, listening to what it had to say, listening to its needs. And so with the two, it's listening to listening to those feelings. For the nine, it was listening to those priorities and needs, and her pain went away. It's so amazing to see how getting into the body and being able to listen to what has been ignored or set aside for such a long time because the person had to, because we know egos are a defense mechanism from this pain. And so when we can listen to that, the pain can go. It's, purpose has been served. And it's great to see. So, I've had clients go from being bedridden to being up and about and being functional, or their pain sort of easing almost immediately, and it's sticking. It's amazing to see.
My gosh, it sounds so fulfilling, honestly. Like I can understand why that is just, it's just a passion of yours. And you're incredibly interesting to listen to, and just like I want to hear everything you have to say. Like you have a certain presence. You have so much information to disseminate. You're very caring, but you're also like your brain is working so quickly to figure out like what path you're going to go on. And so I guess that's where the creativity comes in, as to how you're going to get to the end result and get results for your clients, and help them feel better, and also just a release, and I mean just a bodily release is amazing, however you can get that. And um it sounds like really incredible work. It really does. And what you were saying earlier about um your body in like a certain position whenever the trauma or the incident happened. That is so interesting, because if you think about it, like whatever was getting ready to happen, it just depends. It's almost like you're bracing yourself for whatever happens. And so you're just think about it, like a lot of people get injured when they're trying to they're bracing themselves for an injury when, if they'd have just not braced themselves, the injury wouldn't have been half as bad. And I actually went to to get a massage once, and it's been a long time ago. I probably only had, less than 5 massages in my life, but I was going to get a massage, and the lady was like, "You are very tense." She's like, "You're almost bracing against me while I rub on, while I work your muscles out." She's like, "You don't have to do that. So you're not like, you can like go limp, and you don't have to support your weight against me or whatever." I don't know how she phrased it, but she was like, "You're bracing against me. You're bracing against my touch." And I'm like, and then I took a breath and sort of let myself relax onto the table. I was like, I was, and I didn't even realize it, because it's, someone touching me that I don't know, and I'm half naked on this table. And while I definitely need this because I have such lower back pain, I need this, I want this, but I also don't want you to touch me at all. So it makes sense how you would just hold a lot of tension in your body. And, I definitely have, neglected, that's not fun to say, but I have probably neglected my body for a lot of years, more than I needed to, just because it does seem like a big inconvenience to have one. That the work you're doing, in all seriousness, is, I mean, it sounds like it's incredibly rewarding, and I hope that you continue to do that, and get a lot of, have a lot of success with it. And I hope that, and, like you said, you're continuing to hone your business and your purpose, and I guess a more focused niche, and what you see your work is to do in life. And so where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
I hope that the business is serving as many people as it can, because so many people have chronic illnesses. 60% of Americans have one chronic illness. I think 40% of that have two chronic illnesses. And what's really crazy is that on average, women have chronic illnesses for 19 years and men for 16 years. And if I look back over the course of my life, I've had chronic illnesses for 30 years. So I can totally imagine that to be true, because it first started for me when I was, 14 or 15. I had my first chronic illness because I desperately needed to say things to my mother that I was unable to say, that I was too afraid to say. Not just to my mother, to both my parents, but in that, we see that throughout the course of my life, is that I got depressed as a lawyer. I was going through heartbreak when I was living in Canada. That's when I first got the eczema. Then I moved to London, severe amount of stress. I had eczema covering my body. I had seasonal affective disorder. I had a bunch of things going on. And, a few years later, I had extreme burnout after a particular, job that I've been doing. And in all of that, I mean, it's horrible. Having any kind of chronic illness is horrible because you're in constant pain. But that doesn't just happen in the physical space. It's also happening in the emotional and mental and spiritual space as well. And I think for me, that journey was shaped by just this belief of these illnesses came out of nowhere, so they can go back to nowhere. I just have to figure out how to make that happen. I never once really saw it as permanent, and have always believed that they can be released and let go in some way. Now, I still have symptoms. It's still something I work with, but significantly less than what it ever was before. But it is such, at times, a battle to find your way through that. But because it's shaped, how I've lived my life for 10, 15 years, I think sometimes with head types, and maybe you can relate to this, if there's something you think about constantly, because whether you want to or not, in some way I've been forced to think
Yeah.
about chronic illness. I had no choice
Mm-hmm.
in the matter. And that's all I've done for 10 years. Like, how can I get rid of this pain? Who do I see? What do I do? Why isn't this working? There must be a different way. What's illogical here? And for me as a 7, that question of this seems illogical, what can I do differently? Even though that's part of the 7 ego structure, it's been a huge part of helping me create healing as well. Because healing is about doing things differently and about breaking those patterns. But when you're stuck in it, it's really hard to see. And so I think the personality ego both helps us, well, in some way contributes us to getting into the dis-ease, and also can help us get out of it as well. So,
No, it's very true. No, and I hear, so many stories of, pain becoming the purpose. Like, you are in this pain, you have a vested interest in making and figuring this out. And so if you figured it out for yourself, then you want to extend that because you know how it feels to be in that. And then you want to go ahead and help other people not feel like that too. I think that that's just a natural progression. And I see that that's a lot of people find that's what their purpose is because they've spent a lot of like mental headspace and emotional trauma on it. So
mm,
I can definitely see, like, I don't know, it just sounds like, maybe a coaching thing I need to go through. Seems useful. I don't know. Everything that you said sounds very useful. But I think it's fascinating that you've, enjoyed creativity as a young person and you've allowed, those creative juices and forward thinking and, problem solving, with the six, like to help you come up with, customized plans for people. No one person is, even though they're, it may be the same Enneagram type or whatever, like there's still a nuance because you don't know what kind of
mm,
traumas that they've had and, hold how they
right.
hold that in their body. And so, it sounds like you found a way to, really make an impact, and use all of the things that you've, consumed in all your life experience, um, to help them get there. And as a lawyer, I mean, that's basically an advocate. That's what it's a hired advocate. So you're still a hired advocate,
I
just
had
not in
not
a.
thought of it that way. Yeah, yeah. I've absolutely there. I a friend of mine needed to go to hospital once, and I went in to be her advocate in the pre-surgery process. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, interesting thought. But yes, I like that. I like that reframe. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Well, this has been fascinating. I'm just like some of the things you said, I was like, I don't even have anything to say to that. I've just have not explored that world. I've heard the word somatic, but it's just not something that I've ever taken time to really learn more about. And maybe that's the very thing that I need.
Yeah, because somatic is always with the body. So somatic experiencing is a type of therapy. And depending on how the practitioner uses it, can be kind of like a talk therapy, but it's actually using the body for the therapy. EMDR is often used with different kinds of trauma to help people reintegrate the trauma or what's happened. But I think it's also a great way of calming the body. The vagus nerve and vagal nerve theories are a great way of helping respond to the nervous system. And so thankfully there's so many more ways to learn about the body and what's happening in it and how to work with it, that so many more books and things now that just didn't exist sort of 10 years ago. Even 10 years ago, chronic illness wasn't really well understood at all. Autoimmune hadn't even really hit the popular culture as a concept yet. And so it's been great to see in the last 10 years where I started and there was almost nothing to now where you can access a lot of information really easily. It's great to see that change, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like it seems like whatever the stressor is in your life, like that opens you up, like you're stressed and that decreases the effectiveness of your immune system. And then different foods and different things causes inflammation. And it's that inflammation that opens your body up to like a disease state. So every single thing is like bringing your frequency of your body like down. And the lower the
Mm,
frequency, the more I guess you're in that disease state and your body is like a little bit more available for whatever.
yeah.
Not able to really fight against invasion and free radicals and that sort of thing, right? I mean, just like in a bigger picture, that kind of seems like So the stress would have been, the first thing. You've got to be in a really stressed place, it seems like. Um,
And the stressed place is both internal and external. So you're stressed because the external world is placing pressure on you, that your internal world, because of your beliefs and your unprocessed emotions and like inability to express yourself, whatever it is, stand up for yourself, means that you can't respond to that stress. And so it's
yeah,
internal and external creating the stress. And then wherever your intangible, your emotional, mental, and spiritual space can only handle that pressure for so long before it has to go somewhere. Like the balloon has to pop, the bucket has to overflow, the pressure has to go
yeah,
somewhere. And in human, it'll go into our bodies and come out as some sort of dis-ease. So it can be anxiety, it can be depression, it can be eczema, it can be an autoimmune condition. There's all different layers to it. I don't want to speak to every type of chronic illness, but I do think every chronic illness in some form has an emotional component to it. I think, it's going to vary what that is.
that makes perfect sense. It really does. And I really do enjoy your whole body approach because you don't really see that in Western medicine. And, a lot of coaching, it seems like coaching and maybe other types of therapy, but it seems like coaching in particular doesn't necessarily want to dwell on the past. It wants to take you wherever you are at that state and move you forward. So you're having to take,
That's right.
certain strategies from like a talk therapy and just a way to deal with the past so you can move to the future. And so I really think that there is a lot of creativity in the coaching space.
Mm.
So,
And I think healing and growth at the same time. So I think in therapy, which is mostly healing
mm,
focused, you still need some sort of growth work and stretch to get to
right.
what's underneath. And in coaching, you need some healing in order to grow, because otherwise you're going to
Yeah.
self-sabotage. That will
Yeah.
you will self-sabotage unless there is some healing work. And so yeah, I think it's very important for coaches to be able, and therapists, to be able to do both. And any modality this applies to, but it's yeah, I think coaching is a really interesting space because it's not as regulated or systematized or structured, as therapy training. And so I think coaching can be a mixed bag. And so for me, that's why I like to call it counterintuitive coaching, because by bringing in the frame of the Enneagram, you can go and do some of that childhood piece while having a very clear line as to what belongs in therapy and what belongs in coaching. And so you can bring the healing work in as needed whilst having a very clear boundary as to what goes where.
Yeah, and I think some people, they get into talk therapy and they just, you think if you get to a certain point that you've healed enough, then you can take it out of there and then grow. But some people just don't make it out of that space. But if they could take it almost as a lighter way, not go to the depths of what happened, but maybe take it as like it is what it is, like this happened, this is how we felt, and then now, no, it sounds like I
Mm.
like everything that you're talking about as far as the whole body approach. It just makes the most sense.
Mm.
I like the logic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed everything. This is what we do in the South is we'll have the Southern goodbye. We'll have a first goodbye, then we'll talk a little bit more, and then we'll walk you out to the car, and then we'll talk a little bit more. Then you'll get in the car, you'll crank the car up, and then as you're backing out, we might say a couple more words. So that's where we are right now. So
Love
we're
it.
trying to do
Great.
that. We're trying to ease out of the conversation, but I love it. I could, I feel like the people that I'd choose to have on here are ones that are really fascinating to me. I like all of the really dynamic, very interesting, mind blowing conversations. So that has been this for me. You're very, very interesting. And I think, you know, I think I have a lot of respect for what you're doing. And I think that there's a huge need for it. So I think that you can't go wrong with this. No
Thank
matter,
you.
I think you're onto something with a chronic illness piece.